Ugh, don't let him touch anything. You don't know where his hands have been. The cafeteria buzzed with lunchtime chatter, but suddenly all conversations screeched to a halt. Every eye turned toward the source of the voice, Victoria Kensington, the wealthiest and most influential parent at Oakwood Academy. Across from her, 12-year-old Daniel Carter stood frozen, his tray trembling slightly in his hands. His ears burned red with humiliation as he glanced around at the sea of staring students. Some whispered, some giggled, but most simply watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Victoria, dressed in an expensive white blazer and diamond jewelry, scrunched her nose in disgust. She gestured toward Daniel with manicured fingers, as if swatting away a pest. I can't believe they let kids like this attend Oakwood Academy. This is an elite school, not some charity project. Daniel swallowed hard, gripping his tray tighter. He knew exactly what she meant by kids like this. He was the janitor's son. His father, Mr. Carter, had worked at Oakwood Academy for nearly 10 years, quietly sweeping the floors, fixing broken lockers, and making sure the school stayed pristine for the wealthy students who attended. Daniel had earned his place here through a scholarship, one of the few granted to students from working-class families. Victoria turned to her daughter, Tiffany, who stood beside her with an arrogant smirk. "Sweetheart, don't waste your time with people like him," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "His kind never amount to anything." Daniel felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck. That's when a firm voice cut through the silence. "Mrs. Kensington, that's enough!" The entire cafeteria turned toward the speaker. Principal Lawson stood at the entrance, his face unreadable. His gaze was locked on Victoria, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet authority that sent a ripple of anticipation through the crowd. Victoria let out an exaggerated sigh, placing a hand on her hip. "Principal Lawson, I'm just saying what we all know. Some of us have worked hard to build a life of privilege. We shouldn't have to share it with—" "You're making a very big mistake, Mrs. Kensington," Principal Lawson interrupted, his voice dangerously calm. Victoria scoffed. "Oh, really? And why is that?" The principal's lips curled into the smallest hint of a smile. "Because I know something you don't." A hush fell over the room. Every student, every teacher, and even the cafeteria staff held their breath, waiting. Victoria arched a perfectly shaped brow. "And what exactly do you know?" Principal Lawson took a slow step forward. "Let's just say, you might want to rethink who you're looking down on." Victoria's confidence wavered for a fraction of a second. But Daniel, he felt something stir deep in his chest. Hope. Because for the first time since this humiliating encounter began, he had a feeling that the tables were about to turn. Victoria let out a sharp laugh, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. "Oh, Principal Lawson, you must be mistaken. I know exactly who I'm dealing with." She turned back to Daniel with a look of disdain. "His father is the janitor, isn't he?" "That tells me everything I need to know." A murmur of whispers rippled through the cafeteria. Daniel clenched his fists, his face burning with humiliation. He knew his dad worked hard, harder than most of the parents at this school, but people like Victoria Kensington only saw status and wealth. Principal Lawson, however, remained unshaken. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Mrs. Kensington, do you even know who Daniel Carter's father really is?" Victoria scoffed. "Of course I do. He's a janitor and—" "Wrong," Principal Lawson interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "Before he worked at this school, Mr. Carter was someone very important, someone who helped build this very community." Victoria's smug expression faltered, but she quickly covered it up. "Oh, please. If he were important, he wouldn't be mopping floors for a living." Principal Lawson folded his arms. Would you say the same about a war hero? The cafeteria went silent. Victoria blinked. Excuse me? Principal Lawson turned toward the students. Some of you may not know this, but Daniel Carter's father, James Carter, is a decorated war veteran. He served in the military for over 2 decades. He was a highly respected officer, responsible for leading rescue missions that saved hundreds of lives. A collective gasp filled the room. Even Tiffany, who had been grinning moments ago, suddenly looked uncertain. Principal Lawson continued, "After he was honorably discharged, he dedicated his life to giving back to his community. He chose this job, not because he had to, but because he wanted to ensure that schools like ours stayed clean and safe for every student, no matter their background." Daniel's eyes widened. He had known his dad served in the military, but his father had always been humble about it. He had never talked about medals or awards, only about the friends he had made and the lives he had tried to protect. Victoria, on the other hand, was speechless. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "You looked down on him because of his job," Principal Lawson said, his gaze steady. "But unlike many, Mr. Carter has dedicated his life to service, both to his country and to this school." He paused before adding, "Which is more than I can say for some people." A few students snickered, but most simply stared, waiting to see what Victoria would do next. Her face was flushed red. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but there was nothing she could say. For the first time, Victoria Kensington had been put in her place, and Daniel Carter. For the first time, he stood a little taller. Victoria's lips curled in frustration. "That can't be true," she snapped, her voice shaking slightly. "You're just saying that to make me look bad." Principal Lawson raised an eyebrow. "Do you really think I would lie about something this serious?" Victoria swallowed hard, glancing around. The entire cafeteria was watching, waiting for her next move. She could feel their judgment pressing down on her like a weight. Tiffany, her loyal sidekick, was suddenly looking at her like she wasn't sure she wanted to be associated with her anymore. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," Victoria huffed, flipping her hair again, though her usual confidence had cracks in it now. "So what if his dad used to be in the military?" "That doesn't change what he is now. A janitor." Gasps rippled through the room. Even some of the students who usually admired Victoria were shaking their heads. Daniel clenched his jaw but remained silent. He wasn't going to stoop to her level, but he didn't have to, because Principal Lawson wasn't finished. "You still don't get it, do you, Mrs. Kensington?" Principal Lawson's voice was firm but calm. "You think worth is measured in money and status, but let me tell you something. True worth is in a person's character, and right now, Mr. Carter's character far outweighs yours." The room fell into stunned silence. Even the lunch staff, who had been serving food in the background, had stopped to listen. Victoria's face burned red. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, grabbing her designer bag. "I don't have to listen to this nonsense." But before she could storm out, another voice rang out. "Maybe you should." It was Daniel. Victoria froze, turning slowly. The boy she had just humiliated was now standing tall, his eyes locked onto hers. "My dad doesn't need your approval," Daniel said, his voice steady. "He doesn't care what people like you think. He knows who he is, and he's proud of it. I'm proud of it." A few students clapped, then a few more. Within seconds, half the cafeteria was applauding. Victoria looked around, horrified. This was not how things were supposed to go. She had lost. Principal Lawson gave her one last look. "You may be one of the wealthiest parents at this school, but that doesn't mean you're the most respected. Think about that." With that, he turned to Daniel and put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You should be proud, son. Your father is a great man. Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. I know. Victoria? She grabbed her bag and stormed out of the cafeteria. But this time, no one followed her. Victoria stormed out of the cafeteria, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Embarrassment and fury bubbled inside her. How could this be happening? She was supposed to be the queen of this school, the one everyone admired. Yet, in one afternoon, everything had flipped. The janitor's son, a nobody, had turned the entire school against her. But just as she reached the exit, Principal Lawson's voice stopped her. Mrs. Kensington, we're not done yet. I need you in my office, now. Victoria clenched her jaw, turning to face him. Excuse me? I said, my office, now. His tone left no room for argument. With burning cheeks, Victoria followed him down the hall. The students whispered behind her, and she could feel their stares drilling into her back. When they arrived at the office, Principal Lawson gestured for her to sit. Victoria crossed her arms. I don't see why this is necessary. You don't? Lawson sat behind his desk, his eyes sharp. Let's review what just happened. You humiliated a student based on his father's profession. You disrespected a man who has served his country. And despite the lessons staring you in the face, you still refuse to acknowledge your mistake. Victoria scoffed. So what? Are you going to punish me for speaking the truth? The truth? Principal Lawson leaned forward. Let me tell you the real truth, Mrs. Kensington. Mr. Carter isn't just a former military officer. He is one of the biggest donors to this school. And if that doesn't shake you, let me add this. He's also on the school board. Victoria's heart nearly stopped. What? She whispered. Lawson nodded. Yes, Mr. Carter has been funding scholarships for underprivileged students for years. He believes in giving children a fair chance at success, regardless of their background. But he never flaunted it because, unlike you, he doesn't seek validation from others. He does it because it's the right thing to do. Victoria's hands trembled. This is a joke, right? It's not. She swallowed hard. But he's a janitor. He works as a janitor because he enjoys contributing to the school in a meaningful way. He doesn't need the money, Mrs. Kensington. In fact, he could buy and sell your company 10 times over if he wanted to. Victoria's world spun. Mr. Carter was rich, a millionaire, maybe even a billionaire, and she had just publicly humiliated his son? Principal Lawson let the weight of the revelation settle. Then he delivered the final blow. I have spoken to the school board about this incident, he said, and we have collectively decided that there will be consequences. Victoria shot up. Consequences? You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious. Principal Lawson's expression remained firm. Your behavior goes against everything this school stands for. And considering the amount of influence Mr. Carter has, let's just say you might not be as welcome here as you think. Victoria felt the ground beneath her shake. What are you saying? You'll find out soon enough. Principal Lawson stood. For now, I suggest you reflect on your actions, because you just insulted one of the most powerful men connected to this school. And trust me, Mrs. Kensington, you're about to learn a very important lesson. Victoria's throat went dry. For the first time in her life, she was truly afraid. Victoria left the principal's office in a daze. The students who once idolized her now whispered behind her back. She ignored them, gripping her designer handbag like it was the last shred of dignity she had left. But the real nightmare was yet to come. That evening, she received a call from the school board. Mrs. Kensington. The voice on the line was cold. Due to the recent incident and complaints from multiple parents, we regret to inform you that your position as head of the PTA is being revoked. Victoria's chest tightened. You can't do this. I've spent years building my reputation." "We can, and we have," the board member replied. "Furthermore, your daughter's scholarship, which was funded by Mr. Carter's foundation, has been rescinded, effective immediately." Victoria nearly dropped the phone. "What? No, you can't do that. She earned that scholarship." A heavy silence followed. "Did she?" The voice on the other end was unreadable. "Or did you pull strings to make sure she got it over someone more deserving?" Victoria gasped. "You have no proof." "We don't need proof," the board member cut her off. "Mr. Carter has personally requested that his foundation no longer support students whose parents engage in discrimination and elitism. And we agree." Panic clawed at Victoria's throat. "Please, I'll apologize. I'll do anything." "I'm afraid it's too late for that." The line went dead. Her entire world shattered. The next morning, Victoria arrived at the school, determined to plead her case. She had to fix this, her social standing, her daughter's scholarship, everything. But as she walked through the halls, something was different. The students no longer looked at her with admiration or envy. Some whispered, others outright ignored her. She spotted Mr. Carter mopping a hallway, his expression calm and composed as always. His son, Dylan, was laughing with a group of friends nearby. Swallowing her pride, Victoria hesitated before approaching him. "Mr. Carter," she began, forcing a smile, I want to apologize for what I said. It was wrong of me." Mr. Carter looked at her, his gaze steady. "Are you apologizing because you're sorry? Or because you lost everything?" Victoria opened her mouth but found no words. "You know, Mrs. Kensington," he continued, "I don't hold grudges. But actions have consequences. You judged me for being a janitor without knowing who I really was. You treated my son as if he was beneath you, and now you're facing the same treatment you dished out." She blinked rapidly, willing away the sting of tears. "Please, I just want to fix this." Mr. Carter sighed. "Fixing it starts with changing who you are. Not for me, not for the school, but for yourself." Victoria stared at him, her mind racing. For the first time in her life, she realized something. Maybe being rich wasn't about money. Maybe it was about character. And in that, she was truly bankrupt. Months passed. The scandals surrounding Victoria slowly faded, but she was never the same. Stripped of her influence, she was forced to rebuild from the ground up. And she did. Little by little, she learned humility. She volunteered at the school, worked with underprivileged kids, and even took a job assisting in charity events, some of which were funded by none other than Mr. Carter. One day, she saw Dylan at an event, laughing with a group of kids. He spotted her and nodded politely. For the first time, Victoria smiled, genuinely. She may have lost everything, but in the process, she gained something far more valuable: a second chance.